So just a comfy seat. There we go. And just relaxing into a breath that feels gentle this evening. Letting the eyes close if that feels beneficial for you. Really feeling into both sides of the breath, the inhale and the exhale side. And at the same time, as you're experiencing both of those sides, really thinking about those subtle shifts, tweaks, and adjustments that can be made to make the fluidity of the breath more integrated and the posture of the shape more easy. Let's give ourselves about 30 more seconds here. And when it feels appropriate, we'll let the eyes open if they are closed. And I think let's transition right into a hands and knees tabletop. So we find our way into our base position here. And let's really think about setting the shoulders and then start to sway the hips. Neutral lumbar, so trying to take out that belly drop. Little core activation and lift can help there. And really trying to feel the stabilization musculature, that quadratus lumborum musculature on either side of the spinal column, and how it responds to the relative stability of the thoracic spine as the hips move. So you're pulling into that posterior chain length by moving laterally because we have relative stability in our shoulders, across the shoulder girdle into the thoracic spine. And then eventually tailbone comes back to neutral. Let's curl the toes and just roll back into an exploratory down dog. Something that allows you the freedom to just find the depth and the limitations of this shape at this current point in practice. And then we'll relax back down to hands and knees tabletop, flip the tops of the feet, and sink our way into child's pose. We were in class yesterday. We're looking to kind of accentuate that depth we created around the distal head of the femur, proximal head of the tibia and fibia, and that knee joint, really allowing the glute weight to settle down into that space. And then fingertips grip into the mat in front of us. We'll pull ourselves forward to hands and knees tabletop once again, curl our toes and roll our way back into down dog. So you come back this time push into those index finger mounds so that you really feel this medial line of arm musculature activate. And then let's walk our way forward into fold. And we'll inhale into half lift, get that big flat extension. And then exhale all the way back into the fold. So you settle into that fold, the head becomes the anchor, and we really allow the spine to just lengthen, that intercostal space, continually expanding with each breath. On the inhale into the pull into expansion, and then the exhale just sinking into that length, eventually drifting our awareness to our sacrum, and we'll roll ourselves up vertebrae by vertebrae. Coming up and into mountain. And as we get into mountain, bringing the hands to the hips and keeping the hands on the hips as we slide the left foot straight back into lunge. So 4 fingers on the front of the hips allows for some pretty good feedback as to if the pelvic bowl is tilting or not. At the same time, we're still using the kind of lumbar compression sensation as that feedback on if we're going into an arched shape or not. So thinking about that. And then just keep pushing back into that left heel. Like you're trying to get as much weight as possible into the left foot, hoping to bring a little bit more activation into that anterior of the left hip. And then we can lift the hands to heart center and use that momentum to step back to the front of the mat. And then we'll drop the hands to the hips. Once again, 4 fingers on the front. Slide that right foot back for our lunge side 2. Again, just looking to use the fingers as feedback. They kind of wrap around the ilium here. And then pushing that weight back into the right heel. The right knee is strong, right? So we have no bend in that leg. And then we can, when we feel balanced left to right, bring the hands back and return to the front of the mat. Sweep the arms up and overhead. And let's gaze up towards the fingertips here and really think about getting that chin to the point where it's extending straight up from the sternum, and then squeeze the abdominals down, like towards your belt line. Like you're trying to pull the core down as the fingertips reach up. Hold that energy as you exhale and fold. A little bit of a different core energy. It's like a core retraction, but it helps get some length into the fold. And then let's plant our hands and we'll walk our way back into down dog, walking all the way back into that full length, driving once again into the index finger mound energy and trying to activate that medial line of arm musculature. And then keep that medial line energy as you slowly lower yourself down, hands and knees, tabletop, sorry. And then flip the tops of the feet and sink back into child's pose. Really crafting the depth of child's pose here. Remembering that you can engage into the hands and use hand pressure to like manually drive length into the shape. You can also activate core musculature and craft some elongation there as well. And we'll give ourselves about 30 more seconds here as we just take this second little walk through, thought through of child's pose. And when it feels appropriate for you, we'll pull ourselves forward to hands and knees, tabletop. From hands and knees tabletop, splay out those fingers nice and wide, anchor down into that index finger mound energy once again. Let's curl our toes, lift our seat, roll our way back into down dog. And then we will walk forward into fold. Inhale into half lift. Extension and lift. Exhale back into fold. Left foot slides back into lunge. Left heel grounds. Left hand's going to lift us up in a warrior two. Vertical line engagement. Think about the shoulder girdle and the hip girdle mirroring one another. And good neutral posterior anterior activation. Let's turn the palms up. And then think about squeezing the shoulders in. Like scapula towards one another without bowing at all, just scapula in. And then let's take the arms up like a field goal. I don't know. It's kind of half cactusy. And then we're going to keep the hands as they are. So they're facing towards one another. I don't know if I made that clear. It's kind of hard to see on the video, but we're going to spin the left heel up and come into this little modified version that I can't do because I'm too close to the wall, where the palms are towards us and the elbows are in line with the shoulders. And then think about just pulling those elbows back with as little activation or arch as possible in the back. So it is just palms towards one another, elbows back. And then we'll relax the hands down to the mat and step forward. Into fold. Inhale into half lift. Exhale back into fold. Let that upper back musculature relax. Right foot slides back into lunge. Right heel grounds. Right hand lifts us up into two. So our traditional warrior two alignment first. Good, strong activation on the pinky toe edges of both feet. And then we're going to turn the palms up and squeeze those shoulder blades together before we lift the hands so the palms face towards one another. Keep that shoulder engagement in, squeezing in towards the spinal column. And then we'll lift the right heel and just rotate this forward. Palms face towards one another. Elbows start at shoulder, well, elbows are at shoulder height, but also at shoulder depth. And then we squeeze those elbows back, trying to go behind shoulder depth here. Big anterior pull. And then when you feel balance left to right, we'll release the hands down to the mat and step forward. Into fold. Inhale into half lift. Exhale back into fold. Plant your hands. We'll walk back into plank. And then let's just lower down through that little chaturanga. And slide the elbows forward for a Sphinx pose. So elbows right underneath the shoulders. We're looking for some ease here. So hoping that that big upper back activation gives you a little bit more freedom for the arch. But if you're feeling lumbar compression, just lower the head until you don't. Really just looking for ease here. This is a restorative version of Sphinx. Not super worried about the hand activation, but breathing into the belly so that you feel the belly press against the mat as you pull the inhales. And we'll just give ourselves 15 more seconds here. And when it feels appropriate, let's release our forehead down to stacked hands and find crocodile pose. And we're just at ease here. Give ourselves about 30 more seconds. And then when you feel appropriate, fingertips grip into the mat or slide back underneath the shoulders. We'll press ourselves up to hands and knees tabletop. From hands and knees tabletop, curling the toes, lifting the seat, and rolling and extending back into down dog once again. Just take all of that depth that's available to us. Sway the hips a little bit here. Really think about using the lateral movement to drive the tailbone further and further into the shape. So more and more spinal column length as you sway left to right. And then we will walk forward and find our way into fold. Inhaling into half lift. And exhaling back into fold. And then drift your awareness to your sacrum, and we will either roll or sweep your way up into mountain. Finding that really strong connection in mountain, like you are as anchored and as stable as you can possibly be. And then let's lift our left leg for a little half Karate Kid. So we get that hip activation. And we have been very anterior focused here. We're going to shift that a little bit to the lateral edge as we extend our left foot out in front of us. So the hip flexor has to activate to make that happen. And then sweeping this leg as straight as possible back into lunge. And as you land in lunge, now we transverse as we sweep up into crescent. All of that lateral hip energy kind of wraps right around in that hip crease. Drive back into the heel and really think about activating this sheath of musculature on the front of the left hip. And then float the hands down to the mat. And we're going to slide back into the right hamstring. So starting to straighten into that right leg. At the same time, feel the left heel and the left calf activation that we're able to access. And really think about balancing the weight distribution front and back foot. And then we'll bend that right knee and slide the left foot forward into fold. Inhale into half lift. Exhale back into fold. Likely some pretty good asymmetry here as you settle in. Awareness drifts to the sacrum. We'll roll or sweep our way up into mountain. Once again, anchoring and settling here, really establishing that foundation. And then right knee up into half Karate Kid. It brings the hip flexor into play. And then we'll extend that right foot out in front of us. Good, strong lift. The right leg's going to stay as straight as possible as we sweep it back. It's almost like a Warrior 3 transition. And then we land, and that we just feel that hip flexor wrap around and sweep up into crescent so you can capture that whole anterior sheath, drive back into that right heel, and really feel that right leg energy as you sweep the hands down to the mat. Then we'll straighten into the left leg, or towards straight, right? The idea of straightening is not necessarily straightened. And we want to still maintain that right heel pressure so that we can feel the right calf activate, even as the left hamstring may be the primary sensory point. It's also possible that the right calf is the primary sensory point. It just kind of depends on where the restriction is. And then we'll bend that left knee and step forward. Inhale into half lift. Exhale back into fold. Really settle across that anterior belt. Yes, nice, Lisa. Finding that space. Really thinking about the space you've made yours. And then let's drift our awareness to our sacrum, and we'll roll or sweep our way up into mountain once again. And from mountain, let's go hands back to the hips like we did at the very start of class. Not the very start of class, but you know what I'm saying. And then we're going to use this as a guide. We are going hips back into chair. So it's like the hip hinge is getting pressed back. And then think about bringing your torso forward. So it's like, these don't show a great bend, but there's a bend in the knees there. So we have a really nice bend in the knees and then a whole hinge at the hips. And the forefingers can just wrap in and keep pushing that hip crease back, looking to extend the lumbar through this hip crease or glute sensation. And then release yourself into fold. Plant the hands and we'll walk back into down dog. Down into hands and knees tabletop. Flip the tops of the feet and sink back into child's pose. We want the hips, the hip crease to relax. We want the lumbar to respond to the prop, right? The prop is our thighs here. And we want to recenter our respiration rate. Finding the respiration rate, finding its way back towards whatever that homeostasis of respiration was before we started class. And so there are these twin cities. They have nearly identical infrastructure. They have nearly identical demographics. They have nearly identical geography. And they share a border. They are right next to each other. There's one road that divides them. Just about every single thing about these cities is a mirror image of one another. Except for their leadership. Give ourselves 30 more seconds here. Just last 30 seconds, maybe intense focus, awareness on that respiration rate, on our heart rate. And then when it feels appropriate, we'll pull ourselves forward to hands and knees tabletop. And from hands and knees tabletop, we'll curl the toes, lift the seat, find our way back into down dog. And then let's take our right foot and extend it straight back and behind us. And then we'll step our right foot forward into lunge. And as the right foot lands, the left heel is going to ground. Our right hand's going to come on the medial edge, big toe edge of our right foot, and our left hand's going to roll up to side angle. Big, expansive side angle space. Then the left hand's going to come down. The left heel is going to spin up, and we're going to sweep ourselves into crescent. Thinking about this mid-body neutrality. And then floating the hands back down to the mat. The left heel is going to ground. The right hand is going to come to the medial edge, big toe edge of the right foot. And we'll slide back into the right hamstring for a little triangle. We really think about crafting the shoulder space. Don't worry about where that right hand is, right? So if it comes up the leg, wonderful. Think about being able to breathe into the shoulder space. And then left hand comes down, left heel spins up, right knee bends, sweep yourself up into one more version of crescent. This can be a little bit unstable, right? That right hamstring may have some fatigue to it. Put the hands down to the mat, step the right foot back into down dog, and sway the hips a little. And then the left foot extends straight back and behind you. Step the left foot forward into lunge. As the left foot lands, the right heel grounds, left hand comes to the medial edge, big toe edge of the left foot, right hand reaches up into side angle. Think about the space in between the shoulders that allows you to breathe here. And then right hand comes down, right heel spins up, sweep yourself up into crescent. That big lift, that big neutrality, that big elevation here. And then float the hands down to the mat. Right heel grounds, left hand to the medial edge, slide back into that left hamstring. Take that right hand up into triangle. Once again, think about your ability to breathe into your shoulders. Right hand comes down, right heel comes up, left knee bends. Sweep yourself up into this crescent. Once again, neutral mid-body, big torso elevation. Breathe into the lungs. Float the hands down to the mat. Step the left foot back into down dog. Drive your way back into that posterior chain length. Use all of that space and elevate the hips as high as you can get them. Beautiful. Nice skip. Let's shift our weight forward to plank. And we'll slowly, gently, delicately lower our way down to our belly. This time, we are going to keep the hands right where they are. Splay the fingers out wide. Push into your pinky finger prints and pinky finger mounds like 20% more than any of the other fingers. So there's a real external lateral edge, right? That big, deep lateral edge energy in the hands. And then flex into the quads so the kneecaps lift. And then squeeze into the glutes. And this is a pretty significant glute squeeze. So maybe 80%-ish. And then lift the tops of the feet. And this is a lift that feels appropriate for the lumbar. I'm not going to give a height, but we do not want compression in the low back. So the lift here is kind of glute dependent, and it is neutral trunk dependent. And we're just going to hold this and breathe for 10 more seconds. And then we'll relax and slide our hands underneath our forehead for a little crocodile pose. And we just settle right in to what we have crafted here. Again, can check on both the heart rate and the respiration rate. And just make sure that we're down regulating those in these little pauses, that these little pauses are not just about the musculature recovering, but about realigning that internal physiology. All the things keeping us alive, right? And so both of these cities are preparing for this major storm, this like once in a century storm that is on track to pass right through both of these cities. And it is expected to do significant property damage. There is a high possibility of loss of life. And because of this, the leaders of both cities are out making preparations. Last 15 seconds here. And when it feels appropriate, slide our hands back underneath our shoulders. We'll press ourselves up to hands and knees tabletop. And from hands and knees tabletop, let's curl the toes, lift the seat, and press and extend back into down dog. Drive that length and energize the index fingers and the pinky fingers equally here so that we have this medial and lateral edge activation. And then from that, squeeze the glutes together and see if you can push that tailbone just another 1% deeper into this shape. And then let's walk forward into fold. And we'll inhale into half lift. And we'll exhale back into fold. Let the hamstrings receive, let the low back receive, drift your awareness to your sacrum. We'll roll ourselves up vertebrae by vertebrae. So it's a slow unwinding of this space. Bringing our hands together at heart center. Push into the big toes and pinky toes in the similar way we just did with our index fingers and our pinky fingers. Obviously, big toes are not a perfect equivalent here, but we get that nice medial lateral edge activation. And then with those 2 toes, 4 toes in total, really activating, let's sink our way back into chair. And so way more energy in front of the toe mounds than we normally think about in chair. Don't let the toes grip, just press straight down and then rise back up and slide your left foot straight back into lunge, sweep yourself up into crescent. Ground the left heel and roll yourself open into warrior 2. Smooth all the way into that front leg. Think about getting the tibia and fibia vertical here, and then really think about that space. We're just going to take the right hand down, touch side angle, and then come right back up into warrior 2. Nice, Annie. Spin that left heel up, and we'll come into crescent. And then drop the hands to heart center and return to mountain. And as you settle back into mountain, we activate the big toe mount, or the big toe prince, and the pinky toe prince. Big toes, pinky toes. There we go. And really feel that toe activation. And then sink your way back into chair. Toes pressing down, not gripping. And it almost like forces you to think more deeply about the hip hinge because we're balancing that weight in those toes. And then we'll rise back up. Right foot slides straight back. Right heel grounds. We roll open to 2. Use that big space. Think about the tibia and fibia getting vertical. Then the left hand's just going to come down, touch side angle, and roll right back up. Right heel spins up or back into crescent. Hands drop to heart center as we return to the front of the mat. Sink the seat back towards chair. Take the torso onto the thighs, drop the hands, and then drop the chin to the sternum. Feeling a little bit of a flexion energy in your low back here. And then lift your gaze so that you can look towards the front of your room. And then relax back into the fold. Plant your hands and walk back into down dog. Now, we just went through lumbar expansion, thoracic expansion, and we got that nice little hamstring activation. Drive all the way back into this space and then push across the entirety of both finger mounds. And think about really squeezing those hips back. Yes, beautiful. And let's come down to hands and knees tabletop. Flip the tops of the feet and sink back into child's pose. Feel your body just settle into child's pose. This will be the last version of child's pose. Be the last thing that we do prone, really. So anything that, any little tweaks or adjustments to settle more intently here, to get the sacrum to release here. And so in the first city, the leader is this strong man. He's very loud and boisterous. And he calls for immediate action, and the citizens respond. They take immediate action and they start boarding up the buildings in town, preparing them, prepping them for this oncoming storm. Last 15 seconds here. And when it feels appropriate, we'll pull ourselves forward to hands and knees tabletop, and then we'll extend our legs out in front of us into staff. And from staff, we'll follow our way forward into fold. And we'll just settle and breathe here. Thinking about the opportunity to expand the lumbar. So if the hamstrings are the only thing receiving the sensation here, make sure you bend your knees so that your low back can appreciate what you're doing and expand from that. And we'll give ourselves just 60 more seconds here. And so this leader is very proud of the response he's gotten from his citizens. And he goes out and he starts seeing certain citizens aren't moving quite as fast as others. And so he starts calling them out. He starts telling them they're not doing their part, they're not keeping up. And the citizens follow. They start calling out these people who aren't doing their part and who aren't keeping up. And eventually, we'll walk our spine back to vertical. We're going to bring the bottoms of the feet together. And if it's possible to get the elbows in front of the shins, I really love that. For some of us, the geometry just doesn't work that way, right? So if we can grab the ankles or we can grab the knees, we're just going to take ourselves forward into a little butterfly fold. I like this shape a lot for many reasons. You know, it illuminates some hip restriction for sure, but it also lets us transcend the hamstrings, pulls the hamstrings pretty much out of the shape. So it gives us a little bit better access to our back expansion, especially if you can use either the hands on the legs or the elbows on the legs to pull the head forward, like you're really giving yourself some traction into the spine. And we're going to give ourselves just about 40 more seconds here. And then when it feels appropriate, let's we walk ourselves back up in a vertical, and we're going to lower ourselves onto our spine. And this is a real treat. Right after those two forward fold shapes in a row, we come back and we just land neutral on our mat. Oh, we just feel what we've done thus far in class. So the citizens of the first city, they start going around in these pickup trucks. They all load into the back so they can carry their equipment around. And they find people who are working slow. They get out and they tell them how they're going to be the downfall of their city. And then they get out and they do the work and they move on to the next people. Meanwhile, in the second city, the leadership takes a very different approach. This woman is very soft spoken, she's quiet, contemplative. And she builds a response team. They get in these pickup trucks, they carry all their tools, and they go around and they find people who are working slow. And they help them. And they start identifying pockets of the city with more elderly people. They start researching databases full of people who may have physical limitations. And these response teams go out and they start addressing those areas first. It ends up significantly slowing down the progress of protecting the city. But by the time the storm arrives, let's bring our knees into a bent position so the kneecaps can point towards the ceiling. And then we'll start to sway the knees a little side to side. So by the time the storm arrives in the second city, not everything is protected. Not every building is completely boarded up. But every single individual who is most vulnerable has received the help they needed. In the first city, it's a completely different story. Everything got boarded up before the storm hit. The swifter, more decisive actions and the crews that went around finished the job. The next time that the knees fall over to that left side, let's let them stay there. Last about 20 seconds here on this first side. And when it feels appropriate, we'll bring our knees back to neutral. We'll exhale the knees over to the second side, the right side. In the second city, things are a little bit different. The storm has absolutely done some damage to some buildings. Some windows have been blown out. Siding has been ripped off. There are a few buildings that were less protected that are damaged more than others. But on the plus side, no lives were lost. No one was injured. And everyone makes it through the storm healthy, if not fully happy. Last about 20 seconds here on this second side. And when it feels appropriate, we'll bring our knees back to neutral. Let the bottoms of the feet come together and the knees fall out wide for one last little medial line opening. Medial line opening. And when it feels appropriate for you, we can bring our knees back to neutral. Kneecaps can point towards the ceiling. Ask yourself if there is anything you might benefit from prior to Shavasana. And if there is, let's offer that to ourselves now. If you have everything you need, then let's just settle into a shape where we can fully appreciate Shavasana. Just getting our body as still and into as much ease as is possible here. In the second city, the same groups that have gone along around and helped those most vulnerable protect their buildings now went around and helped those most impacted rebuild. And eventually the entirety of the city was restored to just a little bit better than it was before. In the first city, things were a little bit different. The people that went around belittling those who were working slower continued those bullying tactics. And rifts grew between the members of the community. Let's start to bring some movement to our fingers and our toes. And those rifts and divides grew deeper, stronger, and eventually the entirety of the city was destroyed by its own residents, moving into our elbows and our knees. Our shoulders and our hips, our neck and our head, jaw, eyes, tongue. Eventually, the entirety of the body moves, and we utilize that movement to make our way into a seat. In this seated space, spine gets tall, breath gets fluid, eyes close. And we'll inhale our hands together, heart center. Over the course of the next 8.5 months, can you remember that the fabric of a community and of a nation is not built through bullying and belittling, but through understanding and compassion? And see how that impacts your experience. Thank you so much for being a part of this evening's practice and for being you. Namaste. Happy Monday, guys. Appreciate the heck out of you. Love the heck out of you. I'm going to be back next Sunday to recharge. I hope you have a beautiful week, and I'll see you again next Monday. Love you. Mwah. Have a beautiful evening. Nice to see you. Love the heck out of you.